com.
Coming up next on Arizona Horizon, how should journalists respond to President Trump's claim that the media is the enemy of the people? Also tonight, a look at foreign policy with a prize-winning journalist and sociologist. And we'll visit an inspiring high school in South Phoenix that has a 100% graduation rate. Those stories next on Arizona Horizon.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome to Arizona Horizon. I'm Ted Simons. What to make of the Trump administration's persistent attacks on the media, and how should journalists respond to being described by the president as, quote, the enemy of the people and, quote, the most dishonest human beings on earth? Joining us now to talk about the state of the media under the Trump presidency is Len Downey, former executive editor of the Washington Post and a professor at ASU's Walter Cronkite School of Journalism. And also with us is Julia Wallace, the Cronkite School's Frank Russell Chair of Journalism. Good to have you both here. Thank you so much for joining us. Len, the relationship with the media right now, how do you see it?
Well, it's pretty amazing for the beginning of a presidency. Sometimes this a certain hostility towards the media evolves over a period of time in a presidency. That's what happened in the Nixon administration, where we had to get into the Watergate era of that administration before Nixon was saying very much the same things that Trump is saying about the media, except the difference was Nixon was saying it in what was the privacy of the Oval Office to his aides, but we later heard all about it on tape.
Yeah. How big a challenge is this for the media?
I actually think it's an opportunity for the media. I think that, we believe that we play an important role in democracy, but I think people have forgotten that a little bit. And this is a chance to sort of remind people, what our founding fathers thought about in the beginning, that the press is critical for democracy. So, yes, there's trouble, but there's also opportunity.
Politico, I think, had a story, Trump is making journalism great again.
Isn't that nice?
You agree with that?
I think we have the potential to do it. I think that you can see from the reporting that's happening right now that we hold government accountable. We hold the powerful accountable. And people need and want and expect that. And so this is an absolute opportunity for us.
Yeah, but Len, you're dealing with someone who says that the press is, this is the quote, the enemy of the people, the enemy of the American people, the enemy. That's Stalin talk there, the enemy of the people. That's serious business. Yeah,
it's serious if he then uses that as a way to whip up public support for unconstitutional actions towards the press, subpoenaing reporters, criminalizing leaks of information, or trying to shut down media, as opposed to just simply eliminating them from a particular briefing.
And Julie, again, a couple of quotes here that I want to continue to pass along. As we mentioned here, we have a panel here of President Trump basically saying, the failing New York Times, the failing CNN, NBC News, many more, not my enemy, the enemy of the American people. Sick. Now, he has an audience, and there is an audience that believes that. That's a concern, is it not?
Yeah, I think it's really, though, part of divided America. So the New York Times, the Washington Post, they're seeing increases in circulation. Nonprofit investigative journalism units are seeing big donations coming in because there are some people who understand and that we are an important part of this democracy and we need to make sure that we support it. You have that group. You do have another group that says, we're not going to listen, right? They have no interest. And I think our work ahead is those people in the middle to keep them interested and engaged in the journalism.
And beyond that, to cover them. This is the media's. The media is not completely without fault here. The media failed to cover what was really going on in the middle of the country with people who were losing their jobs, whose lifestyles were being depressed, who failed to understand many of them were going to vote for Trump. An awful lot of people who voted for Obama this time voted for Trump, and the media had no idea why. So it's up to the media now to not only hold this government accountable and continue that aggressive reporting, but also to get out in the country and find out what's really going on in America that makes this possible.
There are some who are saying that the journalists have lost their blue-collar roots. You think that's a valid point.
That happened a long time ago.
Oh, really? Okay.
I've been in the business for half a century.
So it's a bunch of elitists running around reporting on elitists?
I'm afraid that too many of us are elitists. We're college educated, and we tend to live in the big cities, particularly on the coast. We tend to have lifestyles that are different from those people in middle America, and we need to do something about that.
Joey, it's one thing to say to do something about that, but it's another when President Trump, again, and we have another tweet from the president here, and this one again attacks the news media and basically says the news media knowingly doesn't tell the truth, and that's a great danger to our country. And again, here comes the failing New York Times, a joke, likewise, all that kind of stuff. I mean,
yeah, I would agree with what Len said. I think we do have an issue in that we are not as in touch with the country as we need to be, and some of that is because so many journalists are based in the big cities now. I also think journalism has become a little too much part of the establishment. And so he is anti-establishment, and so journalism sort of fits into that category. I think a good example of this was this sort of crazy fight over the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Who cares? Why does the press and the president have to have dinner together and get dressed up anyway? And so I think focusing on the work is where we've got to put our effort, and I think we're seeing the results of that now.
And I think part of calling the media liars and fake news and all of that is to cover up their own untruths. I mean, the president, once again, in this speech to Congress, which was praised for being more presidential, I think that the fact checkers counted up 12 or 13 major misstatements in that alone, not to mention the fact that we now have an attorney general who's under fire for not telling the truth about his meetings with the Russian ambassador during the campaign.
And yet, you know that people hear these stories. You could go from now until next Thursday, talk about how many things he got wrong in that joint message, and they're going to say, you're just against Trump. You have an agenda, you're against Trump.
Well, ultimately, he's going to be judged on what he actually does. Does he succeed in carrying out his promises? Does he do things that would really disturb Americans? People who might be very excited about him calling the press names would still be very disturbed if he did unconstitutional things. We actually have seen that happen. It happened with Richard Nixon. The silent majority that elected him, elected him by a landslide the second time, even after Watergate had begun, turned on him when they saw that, in fact, he was doing things unconstitutionally.
As far as journalism is concerned, is there too much emphasis on neutrality when it comes to dealing with someone like a Donald Trump? You don't want to come off as being anti-Trump. You don't want the liberal bias this and conservative bias, whatever.
Yeah, I think we need to do that. I think we need to basically, whatever biases we have, filter them out and tell the truth as it is. And I think that ultimately that wins the day. I mean, that's what won the day in Watergate. That's what won the day in Vietnam. And time again, that's what happens. I mean, you're going to have opinion people on either side, but ultimately, what is really happening is important. And I think we're moving from sort of phase 1 to phase 2 of his presidency. Phase 1 was, let's just talk. He's telling us, I'm talking about this, and we sort of say these facts are true, these facts aren't true. We're soon moving into the actual action. Where are they moving the money? What regulations are going to get cut? So there's going to be a lot of facts and a lot of information that we will dig out and expose. And people may like it or they may not.
So there'll be things that will affect people's lives. I mean, if the EPA cuts mean that more people are going to be drinking water with lead in it, they're going to notice that and be upset about it. How people are affected by the actions of the president will ultimately decide their views of him, because they felt ignored by the previous administration, and now we'll see if they like the way they're treated by this one.
All right, and we'll see how the enemy of the people reports on the president. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Coming up, we'll talk about U.S. foreign policy, ISIS, and the moral and political costs of war with an award-winning journalist and sociologist. That's next on Arizona Horizon.
What are you doing?
Possibilities. Your day is filled with them.
Reach up, energy in the fingertips, collapse.
TV, play Downton Abbey.
And PBS helps everyone discover theirs. Anytime, anywhere.
Up in the sky, you can see it.
PBS, we're with you for life.
U.S. foreign policy and our general outlook on the world could all be changing under the Trump administration. Joining us now is Anand Gopal, an award-winning journalist and author who is now a visiting professor at ASU's Center for the Study of Religion and Conflict. And also with us, John Carlson, the center's associate director. Good to have you both here. Thanks for joining us. You're a research professor, but you have really, talk about boots on the ground. You have been in the Middle East, you've been in Afghanistan. What's going on in the world right now?
Well, the world is on fire. I was just in Mosul, and half of the city is controlled by ISIS and half by anti-ISIS forces. And militarily, the anti-ISIS forces are winning, but humanitarian-wise, lots of people are dying. Yeah,
lots of people are dying, and it's from a distance, it's hard to figure out who are the good guys. The Syrian civil war, it's impossible to figure out who the good guys are and who the bad guys are. Talk about the situation as you see it when you're there.
Well, part of the problem has been that we tend to think that who the U.S. backs are the good guys, but on the ground that's not often the case. The U.S., for example, in Iraq has backed warlords and militias that have caused a lot of chaos. And the danger in that is that even if we defeat ISIS, the conditions that led to the rise of ISIS have not been addressed.
That's the practical danger in something like that. The moral danger of backing certain sides that may not be the nicest guys on earth.
Well, I think we have seen a real set of difficult decisions to make, and I'm not sure that we've necessarily always made the right kinds of decisions. I think we've chosen safety over risk, and that's had tremendous humanitarian costs for the people in Syria, especially, but other parts of the world too.
With the Trump administration, and it's an American first administration here, and it sounds like it's going to go after whatever it wants to go after, regardless of consequences. What are you thinking? What are you seeing?
Well, I'm a little concerned about the loss of what I would call the moral vocabulary of the American presidency. You don't see that or hear that or find a place for long-standing American values that democracy, freedom, human dignity that have been part of the central rhetoric of all of our presidents that have set out ideals that we're really very much committed to, even if we sometimes fail to live up to them. The failure to live up to them is one thing, but the failure to even espouse them or hold them as ideals that we want to live up to is quite another.
And you were in Afghanistan. I mean, you walked the country. You were with families. You broke bread with folks there. What do we get wrong about them? What do they get wrong about us?
We tend to see the conflict in very black and white terms. There are good guys and bad guys, terrorists and anti-terrorists or non-terrorists. The reality is that it's much more shades of gray on the ground. There are people who do what they have to do to survive. For example, Taliban fighters who may have switched sides, Taliban fighters who may have picked up weapons to fight, not because they wanted to, but because they felt they had no other choice. And so that's a major misunderstanding we have. On their side, in Afghanistan particularly, most people don't even know why the U.S. invaded. Most people don't have a strong sense of September 11th or the war on terror. From their point of view, this is an occupation. This is a foreign army, much like the Russians coming in to tell them what to do.
When they hear about base camps, al-Qaeda camps, and the whole 9 yards, which led up to 9/11, does that change minds, or is it just, it almost feels as though it's so tribal over there that the concept of nationality is a little bit lost. Is that a fair statement or not fair?
Well, it's a very rural country, but you have to keep in mind when soldiers are breaking into your house in the middle of the night and taking your loved ones away, you're not going to be worrying about al-Qaeda. You're going to be worrying about keeping your loved ones safe, and that's been the reality on the ground for most Afghans.
In terms of people breaking into the homes, or what, government?
Government officials, warlords, American soldiers, the whole gamut.
So how do they pick a side?
Whoever can protect them. That's been the guiding principle in Afghanistan. Whoever can protect you, that's the side you're going to support.
With those kinds of moving goalposts, how do you fight a moral conflict?
Well, I think one of the problems, and Anand alluded to this in Afghanistan, but you can see it in Syria as well, is the fact that we tend to see this only through the lens of terrorism. And we say good guys or bad guys based upon that kind of framework, where we have other kinds of ways of thinking about catastrophes like we see in Syria. I mean, it's really a humanitarian kind of crisis, and that kind of thinking, we've waged wars for humanitarian interventions in the past. We intervened in the Balkans and in Kosovo when there were a fraction of the number of casualties or refugees that one now sees in Syria.
A little sideways question that I asked Anand here. National identities, are they formed in these other parts of the world differently than they're formed in the West?
Well, I suppose they would be, and one needs to be cognizant of that. And in some cases, these are identities that some people are trying to reclaim. In the case of Syria, that it started off as an uprising to try to take back a country from a dictator. That requires a new kind of national identity, but it's the people trying to claim it. We have to respect that. We say that we respect that. We should.
And as far as ISIS is concerned in the Middle East, I'm constantly amazed. They almost go out of their way to be as shocking and brutal as inhumanely possible. Who finds this charming? Who thinks that ISIS is my ticket to something? What's going on over there?
Well, it's really interesting. If you look at ISIS propaganda, the propaganda they send to the West is very different than what they send locally. So locally, it's all about local oppression. You know, this government has been oppressing you. The Assad regime has been oppressing you, and we can protect you. We're the ones who can actually fight against him. For foreign audiences, you're exactly right. They realize that by having this kind of sort of theatrics, it gets us talking. It gets the media talking. Everybody's talking about ISIS. The whole world knows about ISIS. And that kind of cachet appeals to a small number of people. And I think that's been their strategy very brilliantly.
Is that small number of people so strong and so dedicated that it can continue to hold out against what I would imagine are a lot of folks over in Iraq and Syria who pretty much had it and would kind of like for this to stop?
Oh yeah, they've had it, and ISIS is losing. Militarily, they are losing, and I expect in the next year they will be defeated. But the question again is what comes next, and if we don't address the fundamental issues that led to their rise in the first place, we'll be talking about some other group in another 10 years.
And it seems like 10, 30, 50 years ago, we've always been talking about the Middle East as having conflict. Why the persistent conflict over there?
Well, the reasons are many and varied, and we don't have time to go into all of them here, but I mean, much of it has to do with a history of intervention, much of it has to do with a history of how the states have been formed, and much of it has to do with how they've been preserved, oftentimes under authoritarian force. And we have gone through a period of time through the recent wars in Iraq and Syria, where we've tried, in many other parts of the Middle East, where we've tried to say and recognize that authoritarians have no place in the future, and yet we've also returned to sort of accepting authoritarianism as a way of keeping peace and order.
If the people in the Middle East had their way, would they just basically get their leaders, I guess you got to find out who your leaders are in the first place, but get them in a room with a big old map and say, we're starting over. World War I, World War II, those boundaries are over. We're starting. Would that help the situation, or would that just exacerbate the situation?
I think, you know, what we've seen in the last 5 years is millions of people in the Middle East rising up and trying to rewrite their own history, trying to have democracy, trying to get rid of dictators. And as John alluded to, the problem here is outside forces that prop up dictatorships, authoritarian regimes. And you can't talk about the history of the Middle East and the violence there without talking about outside forces like the United States, which is deeply implicated in the last 30 years, for example, in Iraq in violence.
And yet there are people who will say if we did not get involved, the situation would be worse. Is that a valid argument?
I'm not sure that's a valid argument, because these aren't places that have always had war. You know, Iraq was not a place that always had conflict.
Yeah, the idea that we're helping, should we stop helping?
Well, it's always a case-by-case basis. I mean, I think from where we sit now, it's pretty clear that the effort to help in Iraq was not helpful at all. The case about in Libya, I think the jury may still be out on that. We may find and look back that that was a good decision. We have stood by in the case of Syria, and we said, well, we don't want to make the situation worse. The question is, how much worse could it get? The policy of doing no harm has meant that we've stood by and watched a lot of harm occur, and it seems to me it would have been better to maybe fail trying than to not to try at all.
All right, good discussion. Good to have you both here. Thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate it. joined Teach for America, a program that sends college graduates to teach in low-income neighborhoods. Her life changed. Yanof wound up in South Phoenix, and what she saw there inspired her to create the Phoenix Collegiate Academy. Producer Shauna Fisher and photographer Rob McJanet show us how a promise unleashed potential.
Quise hacer todas esas preguntas para que todos estén en y a lo último vamos a poner.
At the Phoenix Collegiate Academy, students learn more than reading, writing, and arithmetic.
Sí.
It's about perseverance, determination, and fortitude.
Children have everything that they need to be successful when they're born.
PCA is the brainchild of educator Rachel Yanof. In 2009, she set out to create a school she says would truly serve the community. That community is South Phoenix, mostly African American and Latino neighborhoods. Yanof says the children here are often written off and made to feel as if higher education, let alone graduating high school, is not possible.
Every kid, no matter who you are, where you come from, what your background is, we're going to do whatever it takes for you to reach your maximum potential. And I truly believe that that means every kid should be prepared to have the choice of college, that should be on the table.
Yes, Adam.
Adam Jackson is a senior at PCA.
My academic course load this year is the most rigorous that it has been for all of high school. I have about 4 AP classes, and which are very demanding.
What do you love about South Phoenix?
He says the education he received, along with his teachers, helped him reach his goal of college.
Here's another image.
And they were there when Adam suffered a tragic loss just a few months ago.
My father's death has been really hard on me. I have to say that at some point I did sort of give up on school. Like, I wasn't like trying, and that it showed in my grades somewhat.
Adam got back on track and has been accepted to 14 colleges. He plans to study literature and music after graduating.
I think that day will be very emotional, considering that the graduation day is actually his birthday, sadly enough. So I'm sure that day will be like emotional, and it'll just mean that I, in some respect, did him proud. Like, I did what he always wanted to see me do, graduate from high school.
Es $1.
PCA started small. Its first year was only 6th graders. To even get those students, Yanof and her team went door to door convincing parents to trust her. She was thrilled when they said yes. What she never expected was the sheer determination of these young kids.
They get up every day not knowing if their house is going to be there when they get back, if they're going to be evicted, or if their families are going to be safe, or if the stability that they have maybe sort of pieced together is going to still be there. And yet they come to school and they want to learn and they want to thrive. And how can you not be inspired by that?
Kids who started at PCA are often 3 grades behind where they should be academically, so they have to dig deep and put in long hours to excel. It's that grit, as she puts it, that led Yanof to make what some call an audacious promise.
So we promised that if students and families committed to us, that we would commit to them that their child would be prepared to go to college when they graduated.
Yanof and her team made good on that promise. In May 2016, all of the seniors who had been at the school since 6th grade had post-secondary plans. And for many of them, that meant community colleges and universities. Manny Marino was one of those students.
I got straight A's like my first year, you know? So it's coming from like failing classes to like straight A's, but with more workload, like that doesn't make sense. But it was because of the teachers and the way Miss Yanof structured the school.
Manny is now a freshman at ASU and is an ROTC with his eyes on military intelligence. He says it was his father that kept him going when school got tough. A recovering alcoholic, Manny's dad ended up going back to school himself, earning his GED, his graduate degree, and now his master's.
It's very inspiring for me to see how quickly he changed his life, and it makes me want to better myself.
People know what's happening.
Stories like that also inspire art teacher Shara Nieto. She moved from California to Arizona to teach.
I absolutely am much more invested in their success, yes. It's one of the reasons why I chose this school specifically. Awesome photo. For me personally, it's been important for me to give back to my community, help Abby in the meantime.
A community of students that has shown limitless potential.
Yanov says that the Collegiate Academy is looking for volunteers to help interview students so they can practice professional skills. They're also looking for businesses with internships available. For more information, visit phxca.org.
Become a news source for the Arizona PBS Public Insight Network. Your ideas and insights can help us create relevant and distinctive reporting. Join now at azpbs.org/pin.
Friday on Arizona Horizon, it's the Journalists Roundtable. A new state audit shows Arizona spends $3,000 less than the national average to educate a child. And another major education lawsuit could be brewing, this time over capital funding. Those stories and more on the Journalists Roundtable. That is it for now. I'm Ted Simons. Thank you so much for joining us. You have a great evening.
Arizona Horizon is made possible by contributions from the Friends of Arizona PBS, members of your PBS station. Thank you.
I'm Chef Mark Tarbell. Join me for a brand new episode of Check Please, Arizona. This week, our guest review, Matt's Big